You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. All right, so this is our third recording of the week, I believe, and we have a fourth recording of the week later today. We, after a 6-week hiatus with me on pat leave, we're back in this thing and it's fun. And yeah, great to have you, Thomas. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been looking forward to this. So thanks so much for having me.
And so we start every episode with good news stories where we go around and everybody shares either a personal or work-related story from the last week or two. And it could be anything. And we like for our guests to go first. So we'd love for you to go.
Can I do two? Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah. We are notorious for doing that. So
So I'd say probably the personal one. So probably comes with a trigger warning. So anybody who doesn't like mental health related stories and just wants to switch off, like maybe skip ahead like 30 or 60 seconds. But it's been, I think now almost exactly a year for me since I've had a flare up of OCD, which I've been living with since I was a teenager, basically. And that one it came on quite hard and fast last year, and it can be quite an intense and debilitating thing to live through. But now like on your own and through therapy, etc. Like I basically enjoy all the things that I've been able to enjoy prior to it, and just kind of feels like life's back to normal. The sun's out here in London. It's like super warm, like 30 degrees. So that's really cool. So I guess shout out to therapy. And the work-related one is we've just rolled out the third iteration of our performance framework playbook to really good reception from our managers. We're using for the first time like AI quite heavily in that iteration to reduce the kind of workload on managers, to make performance conversations much more continuous, bite-sized, and more forward-looking, especially like as now everything is sort of shifting. People are sort of worried about what does my job look like in 6 months? So that takes all of that into account. And it's early days, but I'm really looking forward to sort of the additional input that comes in.
Thanks for sharing that first good news story. I'm actually going to stick on that note. This wasn't going to be my good news story, but I'd say for the last 2 or 3 years, I've gone pretty hard in the paint on being consistent with therapy, trying to work through my things, and everybody has their own shit that they're trying to work through. But I wanted to be as present as I possibly could be for my daughter when she was born. And so for the 6-8 months leading up where I knew my wife was pregnant and I knew a baby was coming, that was a really big focus for me. And I just want to acknowledge that life is good right now and there's a lot to be thankful for. Have a little baby who's now 4 weeks old, have the podcast where I get to hang out with Steven every day. The business is growing. So lots of good news in my world.
These are both hard to follow up. I'm going to go in a totally different direction, and which is surprising because I call the work Thomas, that you mentioned, Daniel, you mentioned, I call that like our life's work. Like that, it's a marathon. These aren't sprints in my experience. And, I've been super reflective, as well, but for different reasons, because I'm turning, I turned 49. So I'm very close to 50 now, which is insane. I'm getting married, may have another child, start a whole family journey all over again. And so I'm grateful today, also that I have prioritized mental wellness. I've done the hard work because it is really, really hard. For today, my good news is I survived my first demo day. So I am a non-technical founder, what you would call a functional founder. Now like 12 years into my entrepreneurial journey, I'm probably more of a sales, go-to-market minded founder. But, in my 25-year career, I've always gravitated to technical things. So I've been a head of HR technology. I have been HR data security champion for our information security team at Goldman. Like, I always was like super fascinated, built Excel tools, that sort of thing, but I can't code. And so I've never been able to code. And in my entrepreneurial journey, I've always had to rely on people on, I consider, like a very critical thing, which is like the product itself. And so, through the conversations we've been having, through some kind of mentoring groups that I've kind of set up recently, I just took the plunge. And we're going to talk a lot about this, so I won't go too deep, but I'm going to be launching a newsletter that relates to what we talk about in the Modern People Leader, but goes a lot deeper into very specific things that I think we're going to cover today. So it's a weird timing that I just got out of a demo day presentation with a peer mentor of mine. And now I'm going to be talking about just naturally some of the things that we're doing. So I won't go into the details, but survived my first demo day, got great feedback. I need to zoom out a little bit and think about the UX and in terms of the platform I'm creating. But you can build your own website, in a really, really good one, in less than a week, because I started this last Friday. So that's my good news. With that, what we really want to talk about today, Thomas, is you and your background. The next question is really my favorite question that we ask our guests. I call it the Brene Brown question. And like, what's your story? Like, tell us about you. You've already shared, you've already been vulnerable with us and shared some things about your life, but like, walk us through your journey, the ups and downs, the twists and turns that led you to becoming the head of people at Juro.
We've had a lot of chief people officers come onto the show, and if there's one thing that they have in common, it's that they run their org their way. I think of people like Crystal Boyson at Sprout Social, who completely rethought performance reviews for her company, ditched long-form questions, created 3 clear ratings, which they then can auto-calculate into a final rating. I think of Carmel Galvin from Klaviyo, who ditched the generic way of measuring quality of hire and built a custom framework tailored to each team. I think of Jessica Svan, who tracks LTV to ECAC to evaluate every single manager. Like, these are the exact kinds of people leaders who wish they had a tool like ChartHop. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ChartHop, ChartHop is a flexible PeopleOps platform and HRIS that brings in all of your people and business data into one place. So think, HRIS plus having the ability to bring in data from places like Salesforce. And they let you customize key processes like headcount planning, compensation, performance, and engagement exactly the way that you want it. No rigid templates, no one-size-fits-all playbook, just the flexibility to build the systems that you truly believe in. With ChartHop, you can really run your org your way. If their platform sounds like something that you want to learn more about, I highly recommend that you go request a demo. Just go to charthop.com and make sure to let them know that we sent you.
Yeah, so I'm German originally, so if you can hear an accent, that's where that comes from. So I guess where it starts that, like, coming out of school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I decided to go for psychology because it felt like you can sort of like still go anywhere after that. You can kind of like think of almost any like career trajectory, and you say like, I study psychology, and they go like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? Marketing, that makes sense. HR, that makes sense. So I did that, but I've always kind of been really interested in just living in other places. So whilst I was in school, I lived in New Zealand for a little while, and I actually just realized quite quickly that academia, or like staying in academia after like 13 years of high school, wasn't really for me. So I kind of used the opportunities that kind of university offered. Like in Europe, you've got Erasmus partnerships and all of that, to travel first to Stockholm to study abroad there. Then I did a 1-year internship in Tokyo, which was a fantastic time that I had. Basically, whilst I was there, I told my supervisor at uni, like, look, I'm probably only going to come back to university once, and that's to pick up my diploma. Can I finish my degree abroad? Which I did, like working from the top of a department store somewhere in Shibuya. That was a very interesting month. But then went from there, like this was a very big multinational corporation that I was working for, Bosch. And I decided I really wanted to see a kind of flip side of like really big company, which is startup. So kind of took a 6-month placement, like a role in Paris. For a while, working with a kind of B2B SaaS company called Algolia. And when that ended, I kind of thought about, could I finally go to a country where I don't have to learn the language again? So settled on London, and that's how I ended up in like 2018 at a company called Paddle, where I actually started as a recruiter. So my entire background is not actually like PeopleOps or HR. It's actually just hiring. So did that for a good 2.5 years, and then accept a role at Juro, which first was for talent acquisition lead, pretty much exactly at the start of the pandemic. So I think lockdown in the UK was announced, I think, on the day that I accepted the offer. So it was a very odd mix because I didn't actually end up seeing my team, which at the time was 15 people, and we're now around 110. Didn't actually see them for the first 18 months, except for through Zoom. And yeah, it's been quite a ride in the 5 years since. Now, like VP of People and Talent, also taking on IT. But really been through like everything, and like the role felt completely different sort of within that time, because you move through a pandemic, inflation, stagflation, great resignation. Now the AI era is coming on. But yeah, that's where we are. That's where we are today.
I cannot believe it's already been 5 years. Like we started this podcast during COVID, like December 2020. And yeah, it's crazy how fast time has flown by. Can you give us a quick 20-30 second rundown of what Juro does? And tell me if I'm saying that wrong. Juro, is that right?
It is Juro, yes.
Okay.
Oddly enough, it actually means like something in a lot of different languagues. People sometimes ask, where does that come from? But apparently it's Latin. But Juro is an AI company that started out as traditional SaaS, but has kind of like evolved since then in the legal tech space. So we are on a mission to make it ridiculously easy for business teams, like really anybody working with contracts or agreements in a company, to kind of draft, template, negotiate, sign, renew those contracts through kind of one native experience, as opposed to how it happens today, which is you kind of are in, you live in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs, you kind of redline and like you lose track of versions, you end up in this PDF purgatory, you pay a lot of money for a DocuSign license, which really just kind of makes a PDF just a little bit editable. So you kind of move through a lot of different tools as you do that. And we try to kind of simplify that all in one journey through what we call intelligent contract automation. So we're really excited about a couple of the big AI features that about to release on our roadmap. So really think about what as an HR leader or like people leader, what could life be like if you didn't have to deal with like offer letters or employment contracts or amendments or like equity grants or whatever. If you could like take a big step towards like automating all of that and helping with the negotiation. So that's basically what Juro does in a nutshell.
I feel like, there's so much there as an entrepreneur, there's so much pain that I've experienced related to.
I'm literally on their website right now.
to the things that you just described. Like we could go into that for an hour, but that's not what we want to talk about. We can talk about that, but we really want to drill into kind of your perspective on the state of HR right now. If you listen to the Modern People Leader Live event that we had in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, like this was a topic that was front and center just around tech, AI, the future design of the workplace. And so that's where I would like to start. One of the things you mentioned in our prep call, you said that giving someone ChatGPT access will soon be like giving them an email. Like, how far do you think we are from that day? Because like I can't wait, because it feels like, there's two worlds that people are living in. And it's like there's the worlds where you have full access to, an AI tech stack. And then there's like the corporate world or like everyone else. And I, have a hypothesis that, a thesis around, what it's going to take to get like broad adoption. And so I'm just curious, like, when you say that, how soon do you think we will be to that day? In addition, what does AI enablement look like inside a company, and when do you think we're going to see like this trend pick up steam on a broader basis?
So I think in some companies that day is already very much here. And I think that this is the advantage that you have when you're like a small like company of maybe a dozen or maybe like 100 or a couple of hundred people, right? The kind of frontier stuff tends to happen in those smaller companies first, and then it takes like larger, heavier corporations that maybe aren't like, agile little sailboats, but more like big tankers. It takes them a while to kind of like reverse course. I don't actually think that applies as much with AI, because we see a lot of very large corporate companies kind of do these shifts, right? I think there's you've got like ServiceNow, where the CHRO actually now like takes on the entire like AI transformation. They've got IT like reporting into them now as well. But I do think in just in outside of work and like in personal life, I think people are interacting much more with AI functionality, even if they don't realize it. So I would kind of go out on a limb and say like this stuff is already stitched into the way that we work, we interact with like clients, or the way that we interact with just with like day-to-day like technology, from stuff as simple as like your Spotify playlist all the way to like the iPhone that you're using. Like you can make sort of predictions on like how much of a like shift is going to happen in like 2 years or so. But I think that the one thing that everybody can sort of agree on is you're all driving on site. Like nobody really knows what's happening. Everything is like moving extremely quickly, and I think that is the shift that everybody tries to adjust to, because that ambiguity isn't for everybody.
Yeah, it feels like there's almost like this new emerging AI tech stack that is core to like what every team needs. And so what I mean by that is like you're gonna need ChatGPT, you're gonna need some sort of like call recording software, whether that's Fireflies or Read AI or the countless other solutions that are out there. And it's funny, like when I think about something as simple as like call recordings, when Steven first signed up for I think actually I signed up for Fireflies first,
And then you
like
canceled
a long time ago, and then I canceled it because I just didn't like it. I didn't like the idea of every call being recorded. And then Steven signed back up for it maybe like a year later, and he kept trying to convince me for like 3 or 4 months. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I feel like it makes people uncomfortable. They don't want everything being recorded. And then I eventually gave in. And now, like, I see the power of it. We get auto generated notes. We can feed it into other projects that we're doing. It just makes everything better. And so, yeah, I do think that that change is slowly happening. And we're probably like, ahead of other companies because it's just the two of us. But sorry, Steven, you're going to say something.
I mean, my mindset these days is, if there's not a transcript, then it didn't happen. Like, there's no point of it. And I know that might be an extreme view, but it's just that core. Like, why would either of us do that? Like, Thomas, you should want the transcript also, because of what we can both do with this data, the structured data.
And then I feel like if you take it even a step further, there's platforms like Make or Lindy or all of these like business workflow automation tools that have like an AI layer. And I feel like, you know, aside from maybe me and a handful of other people that I know, like most employees aren't using these tools. And so I'll just stop right there. Like, are all of these things on your mind, Thomas?
Yes, they are. It's really interesting, isn't it? Like how big the gap seems to be, where like some companies are like, oh yeah, we're sort of like thinking about it, and other companies are thinking like it's 2025, what are you doing? Um, and we actually ask everybody in our hiring process in the very beginning of like, how have you used AI to make your life like faster, easier, better? And you get, we've seen quite a drastic change even over the last couple of months that we've asked that question, from people who are like work doesn't let me do it, So like I do it a little bit personally to, oh yeah, we're now using, I don't know, from sort of starters package, like, we're now using Gong AI for sales calls, to, teams really going, okay, cool. We've basically, abandoned the classic product roadmap. We're moving in much more iterative like product loops using, whatever, like Cursor, ChatPRD, like all of these kind of like new, very frontier bits of technology that I think one of our product managers put it something like, they may be a little bit worrying, but also you kind of don't want to live without them once you've used them. And for us, the way that we are like in that shift, like there's really two things that we're doing. The first one is we're just giving everybody access in a safe way, right? This stuff goes through our legal team, etc. But then second of all, just making it core to how we work, right? We are using ChatGPT on the daily basis. We're very partial to Granola as a note taker. But that's sort of, the next thing that we think is going to go the way of nobody's going to question like what the ROI of this is. Nobody's going to question, what that ROI of email overwriting letters is, right? We're using custom GPTs. So as part of that performance playbook, we've kind of built a custom GPT that helps managers turn their unstructured feedback into structured one. Our engineering team, I think basically 95% of them are using Cursor to help with code. Our finance team is basically replacing their like sort of classic ERP with an AI native one. So all of that stuff is kind of happening as almost like a bottom up motion. Once you kind of give this sort of top down sense of it's okay, we want you to experiment because we don't know exactly where this is going to go, but we do know that this technology is here to stay. So aside from tools, we're also focusing on, rituals. Like we've got how to AI sessions that are kind of peer led, where like, here's a thing that I did like last week, maybe it helps you. In our all hands, we're doing something called lab reports, where we pick some example of somebody who's experimented and like what they've learned from, using, our marketing team tried using Synthesia for like AI generated videos. Our product team is like playing around with things. So like all of these things, they're kind of like these tiny little loops that I think help a company sort of go from like, we don't know what this is about to, oh, this is actually really, really cool. If you pair that with an AI philosophy, which we've just rolled out internally as well, saying like, here's what we're going to use this stuff for, and here's what we're not going to use it for. Because sometimes people really just need to hear that, like where the guardrails are. I think for us, that's really made a change in, saying we're kind of shifting to AI or becoming AI native, which nobody really knows what that means, to having actively like things that we're saying like this, and that is what we're doing. And this is the receipts.
Is this philosophy and these guiding principles, are these shared like publicly? Like, I'm just curious. I would love to, if they're not, that's okay. But I was like, in my mind, it would be, if they are public or if there's anything you can share with us around the philosophy, like to share.
Thomas is the king of open source.
Well, the thing is, like, there are so many HR leaders. There are two camps in HR right now. There are those that are openly embracing and that fully understand, like, this is where everything is going. And then there's what feels like a much larger camp that is still rooted in fear, uncertainty, doubt. There's even I'm seeing fear mongering on LinkedIn about the use of AI and how we're all, well, I won't even get into it. And so, I think more and more companies that have philosophies that are willing to share this with the world, it will make a huge impact on our ability to kind of move forward collectively, because that's music to my ears. Like, if I worked for a company and the CEO and the leadership team had put together an AI kind of manifesto of sorts for the company, like that would be like, I would immediately engage and know like, okay, this company is for me. And B, like I would appreciate the openness. So I'm just curious, like how widely do you share this information?
So we've actually I've always been like a really big defender of making pretty much whatever information we can that's in our kind of company handbook, which lives on Notion public, which is great because other like people leaders etc. can learn about it, but it also helps with candidates who might be interested, right? A lot of the feedback that we often get is, it's like a lot of the sort of basic questions that I sort of tend to have there, like already answered, which is, great. And we continuously kind of refine what we're doing. But the AI philosophy is also public in that handbook. I actually just shared it in chat, so sorry, audio listeners. But folks will probably be able to find it quite quickly as well, right? That one was created basically first of very early sort of rough draft, right, between like myself and the CEO, then shared with kind of a small group of ICs, then with a wider group of managers. And we actually just, so this is really hot off the press. This has been live for like less than 24 hours. We did a kind of 3-day async kind of input sprint where we just then shared the doc with the entire company and said, this is going to affect all of us. So like everybody just input on it. And we will kind of take those comments. And this is sort of version 1 of the end result, which we plan to kind of build on, iterate on with, how do we help, people train that? How does this kind of show up in our expectations of people's roles in the future, etc.?
And so something else you mentioned in our prep call is that the workplace tech team now reports into the people team at Juro. And so, I mean, I have so many questions for you. I guess we can start with like, what led to that decision?
Yeah, we kind of, like we enjoy, not calling it HR, but calling it people. We don't call it recruiting, we call it talent. So in typical that fashion, we also didn't want to call it IT. So we have a different name for it internally, which is WorkTech. And it's funny, whenever I say that, I'm getting quite blank stares from like other folks in the like people community, because they're like, that decision was actually co-driven by the CTO, the CEO, and me. Mm-hmm. And the driving factor behind that was that we believe that people as a function is increasingly about owning not just the workforce, but also the workflows. Mm-hmm. And I think that a thing that's happened until now, like quite naturally, is that people really is in all of those conversations of like who does the work, but sometimes focusing not so much on like how is that work done, how do you do that work in the kind of most efficient, easy way possible. And that's actually what the mission of WorkTech is at Juro. The stated mission is bringing people and technology closer together. So tech is really actually a huge part of the employee experience. And if you think of people as a product, as an approach, the idea that the employee experience can be crafted, can be improved, it can be measured, right? Then the question really becomes increasingly, how can the technology that we all use, especially in like software companies, how can that be used to help people do work even better? And some of that is obviously co-driven by the kind of functional leaders, right? I work a lot with the CRO, the CFO, etc. Like what would this look like in your teams? But that's sort of, I think, sort of quite a natural evolution of what people is there for. I actually saw a talk maybe like a couple of weeks ago that sort of introduced the idea of first it was like personnel, then it was HR, now it is people or PeopleOps. What's the next thing in 2 years? And they introduced the idea of should we call it the like chief work officer? Because the idea there is, do you actually focus on the question of, it's like, who do we hire and how many people do we need, or that, as opposed to how do we plan to work with AI now? How do we bring people into that now? Like what work truly requires like human judgment, creativity? What task-based outputs could we automate? Like all of these questions, they are naturally already coming up. And they will need some kind of owner. And that can look different ways in different companies, right? Might be different people owning that. But in our case, we kind of said, like, look, those are questions that are fundamentally about people in the future of work. So where could the driver sit? Right? It's early days, but that's currently like where we got to.
I got laid off in November 2022. And I just remember having so many mixed emotions. I was sad, I was embarrassed, but I was also relieved. One moment asking my wife if I should quit my job and try to make MPL work, and the next day that decision's being made for me. And I'm lucky. Most people don't have a passion project to fall back on like the MPL. And it's terrifying and confusing trying to navigate your next steps after something like a layoff. And honestly, the outplacement services that were offered to me at the time felt pretty underwhelming. They didn't seem like they'd actually help. And I just remember feeling frustrated and a little bit bummed. I thought about asking for more support, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I realized that the leaders managing the process were just as overwhelmed and frustrated as I was. They were being asked to do more with less. They were handling these layoffs with little support or guidance, all while trying to protect the company's culture and take care of their people. And so that's why Career Sandwich's mission really hit home for me when I met them. It's not just another outplacement service, it's holistic transition support that helps both individuals and the people leaders who support them, giving everyone a little bit of peace of mind during a really crazy time like a layoff. And they do more than just help your alumni brush up on their resume. They help them tell their story, from figuring out who they are to defining where they want to go next. Career Sandwich helps them craft a narrative that really makes sense of the journey, and their platform is pretty sick. There's one-on-one coaching, there's group workshops, there's on-demand resources that are designed to help alumni really articulate their value, the story, and feel a little bit more confident about their next steps in a time that feels very uncertain. And so, if you're an HR leader that's having to part ways with people from your team and need support, making this process as least crappy as it can possibly be, then I highly recommend checking out Career Sandwich. If you want to get in contact with their team, go to careersandwich.com/MPL. That's careersandwich.com/MPL.
Well, I can tell you, going back to my good news story, until I embarked on like this platform creation project that I'm working on, I didn't totally get it, to be honest with you. Like, I understood the notion that if AI is going to be an integral part of the work tech stack, like some may, and those that have worked with it, I believe it's going to be a core part of our work tech stack, and it's going to directly interface with our employees, then like I could see the connection to HR and why an HR leader would want to get involved. But when I kicked this project off, and again, I started this last Friday, so I'm less than a week in, and I have a full website built, and that I hopefully will be pushing by the end of this week. And so the first thing that I did, though, is I set up a CTO for the project in Claude, and I set up a full stack engineer and junior dev in GPT, and I gave it information, background about all my businesses. I fed it my LinkedIn profile. So like I introduced myself, I introduced the project, and I had multiple bots that I'm working with prepare briefs to onboard the CTO and to onboard my full stack engineer. And so, and I did all of that before I asked it to write any code. I'm using Lovable, so it's not actually code, they're prompts. And so, but then I felt really good about, my CTO and my full stack engineer's ability to build the prompts that I wanted to build, because I onboarded it, like I don't even know what to call that, because it's not really an onboarding, more of like a data dump, but I'm going to call it onboarding. And so I share that because now I totally get it. Like it's almost like a must to me. Like I don't know anyone that I would trust. There's no one at a company that I would trust more to onboard, the AI employees in a way that makes sense to work with, like our culture, our values, our employees, and what they stand for. And so like, again, within the last week, my mind has just been blown on like what you can do and what's possible having just built a product. And now I totally get it. And I think it's going to be a requirement. Well, depending on the type of company you want to be. Because I think we're going to reach a crossroads where companies are either going to want to be this modern type of company, or they're going to like hang on for dear life with the traditional model. But any thoughts there?
And this is also like just absolutely like, I mean, like this is also like not to diminish the specialism of IT professionals, right? There's parts of the like WorkTech team that we have at Juro where I'm like, you have to explain this to me. Like I don't know how it works. But the thing that I have found is that is just how much like overlap there is between what the WorkTech team actually wants to achieve, right? They don't want to be a blocker, they want to be an accelerator, which is ultimately what teams are at the end of the day. They're a catalyst, right? Like, you know, like the company might not like immediately like go under if a people team isn't there, but the expectation, if you do your work well, that is that everything else just grinds to a halt. Because if you, and this is how I think about people, is if you build kind of the operating system of the company, then, you know, in sort of typical Apple fashion, if you build that operating system well and you keep it up to date, then things should just work. And the people that are moving within that operating system can focus on doing their core job, whether that is building the tools that we need, whether it is bringing on new customers, whether it is expanding those customers, whether it is, making sure that our P&L statements are correct. They should be able to do that without having to worry about anything that kind of pertains to their employee experience, because it just flows so well. And, you know, we think about this stuff all the time already, right? Like a lot of people just think about, how do I automate the onboarding and offboarding process? You know, how do I make performance management like less of a chore? How do I make the pay increase conversation, right? I have all of the information, but I still do a lot of manual work in trying to kind of clobber all of that together. If you kind of take that mindset and transport it to, okay, how do sales teams run and what fundamental similar questions are they dealing with? It's just the subject matter is a different one, right? There's a parallel between like the talent team and onboarding people and the sales team, which is trying to drive like turn prospects into customers. You can see a lot of those parallels, which is why I've always advocated like very heavily. I think Kelly said this in like the previous recording when you did the live podcast, get off the people island and live on the other business islands. If you understand that, you will be able to drive that change much, much, much more quickly than if you kind of try to sort of stick to your own sort of way of doing things.
So Thomas, before we move on, and I'll edit this out, do you want to just keep going down this thread, or would you rather move on to the other sections? Because I feel like we could keep going, but
we haven't even asked about Notion yet.
Yeah,
a lot of questions there.
Whatever you guys want to do. Like I'm also guided a little bit by you. What do you think is going to drive engagement? What do you think is going to make for like good sound bites?
I have a few more questions. So maybe we'll just keep it going for a little bit more. And then we can save time at the end. I think maybe we'll have to skip over the business fluency, and maybe I'd love to just briefly talk about the conversation you had with Jessica and like how you're thinking of evolving PeopleOps as a product. But before we do that, I'll start my response over. So you mentioned, you know, one thing that's on your mind is owning the workflows. And, you know, after hearing, you know, Steven talk about how in a week he was able to build a website, there are countless things that people can now build using tools like Lovable. You know, if you have some more technical chops, tools like Cursor. You know, somebody explained it to me the other day. You can build a prototype in something like V0 or Lovable, and then literally just like copy the code and bringing it over to Cursor and like really build it out. And so when I hear that, I get like a little bit scared for the legacy like HR tech companies, because if you can get really customized with how you're building your in-house work tech, like why wouldn't you just like build some of this in-house? And so that could just be like a very naive perspective, not taking into account like how difficult it is to build out these tools. But what's your reaction to that when you hear that?
I mean, some companies are doing it, right? Klarna has gone out and said very publicly that they are ditching their entire like stack and basically rebuilding every single thing in house, right? Jury is out on how well that's going, but you know those are questions that are on a lot of people's minds, right? Like how much of the stack that you have is, is still going to serve you in 2 years, right? I am not married to basically any kind of tool in the stack that I have. In fact, we were the first team to roll out an AI agent that's kind of exposed through Slack, right? The fact that we've kind of built that Notion, you call it a handbook, but for us, it's really a help center or a database. The fact that we've kind of built that out over 5 years and really maintained it, that really helped us adopt an agent into that, because it can kind of read that entire information and answer the sort of basic repetitive questions that folks would normally ask like members of my team, right? So fairly like basic use case, but this is where something that I sometimes get a bit of like flack for, which is, why are you focusing so much on like making sure your documentation is up to date, right? It's so HRy. And I'm like, well, now it pays off, because we've got like the base, the database, the personal context of our company, which is Juro, and it actually helps us do things more quickly. And I actually did the math on this sort of napkin calculation, because I presented it in our last all hands last week. Like there's about like 2 to 3 questions coming in a day. That's a 100-people company. Imagine just, maybe each of these takes between like 5 and 10 minutes to answer. A bit of context switching, you're kind of taken out of one thing that you're doing and going into the other. Like even with that, that's like basically an entire week saved a quarter, right? And that's massive, right? That's an entire week of just trying to respond to things that people could just read themselves. So I think going back to your original question, I think like a lot of companies, they are asking like, is this thing that we're paying like top dollar for, where we're not using half the features, and the other half, like, seeing what, things like ChatGPT, Claude, Cursor can do, like what is on your roadmap? And that's a question that I actually ask every time that I, explore new tools. Like, how are you actually on this on this roadmap? That's how we've selected our latest ATS. That's how we're checking like our HRIS, and that's how I basically pick every single tool that we've got.
So I'm still a noob on all of this stuff, and I'm learning a lot every day. But I was introduced to the concept of forking the other day, where basically like you can copy.
Wait, is this appropriate for a business podcast?
It is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Bad dad joke.
Just enunciate the R.
Yeah. Forking.
Like, what are they talking about?
And so I had no idea what Postgres was, which is a database.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's something called Supabase, which I've been told is basically just like a copy of Postgres, but with like other features built on top. And I'm probably getting some of that wrong. So please forgive me, anybody who's listening who knows more than me. But like, I think like the future of all tech, whether it's HR tech or whatever, I feel like there needs to be like more open source HR tech. I don't know if that even exists, but like imagine being able to like fork a feature from ChartHop or Lattice and build on like your own features over it. But I don't know. I don't know if anybody's doing this right now, but if they are, let me know.
In the I've asked my team to just get familiar with tools like Lovable by just like pick one little problem and vibe code a solution to it, right? We'll see whether we're going to implement it or not. Like we'll see whether that works. But I'm very deep into the stuff anyway, right? I typically I listen to very like producty like podcasts. I'm a big fan of like Lenny's podcast, like the Lycon podcast from like Y Combinator. Like I'm a nerd about this sort of stuff anyway. But I also like very much understand that like most people in the like people leadership space, like they might not be, right? And they might be, curious, but don't quite like know what it is, or they're like cautious about stuff. So, like you don't have to be like a wizard in any of that stuff to kind of start small, right? And a lot of people, they're just figuring out the use cases of ChatGPT. So one thing that I've been doing with my team, because we get we pride ourselves on providing a very good candidate experience, which means that we actually have, as a standard, we send a personalized rejection email to any candidate that has at least one touch point with us. So even if they just had a qualification call with me or a member of my team, because I still like muck in hiring every month as well. But it takes a while to like craft a personalized rejection response. We actually like shortened that time by like 95% by creating a custom ChatGPT project with kind of one prompt that more or less just says, every conversation I'm going to start in this project is going to be the raw feedback from our ATS to a candidate. Please turn it into like this, and that, so I can more or less just copy paste it into our email template. And that is now, so like we've refined that over time. So, but now it's like really, really good. So basically we can create like personalized rejection templates to candidates so that, people really do, feel that, we've listened and we want to give them reasons of what we like and why we ultimately chose not to progress, so that they can take that into their next interviews. And that's also, that has actual like impact on the things that you care about down the line, right? Our Glassdoor scores are really quite like good and high, and they have been ever since, like for the past 5 years or so. And it's these kind of little tweaks that you can do today and make that experience better.
So I want to shift gears because I've said this hundreds of times on this show. It just amazes me how quickly an hour can go by when it's a group of like-minded, passionate people talking about things they love. And so we're not quite at the end of our time, but we're getting close. And so you've mentioned a few things, that I want to just chat about before we wrap up. So you mentioned, always leaning to calling HR, thinking of a more evolved way to refer to the HR organization. You also mentioned your analysis of, the time spent on what I call human operations, like these random, like administrative, not strategic human operations. So, the questions that you're getting on a daily basis, and all of that screams people operations as a product. Also known, some may know the book that Jessica Zvon wrote, Built for People. And I know you have very specific views on that. And so I want to just chat and nerd out a little bit on like, HR operating models. And, you've mentioned a conversation that you've had with Jessica on like, not that PeopleOps as a product is dead, but, what is the future of PeopleOps as a product? And you are already feeling tension, between kind of the current iteration and whatever that next iteration is of this concept that I think began with Agile HR. Like that was like 10, 15 years ago, Agile HR was a thing. No one understood it. And so we made a lot of progress. And I agree, there's still a lot of progress that could be made, but I'm curious, like, what are your views on, like, what is that tension and what kind of has inspired you to really push the envelope on, like, what PeopleOps as a product could be?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned, right, Agile HR, just that word Agile, right? Because Agile itself, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but like Agile kind of came out of that shift from, sort of server-based to like web-hosted like infrastructure, right? That basically just changed completely the world of like what kind of problems can we solve, how do we build product, etc., right? And AI now I think seen as next shift, right? Because it completely changes the scope of the kinds of problems you can solve, how quickly you can prototype, etc. There's a really interesting, for anybody that's interested, there's a really interesting article, I think it's called, on Reforge, which talks about like AI native product teams. So to be very, very clear, I'm a very big proponent of the people as a product flow, right? I follow that, every day with my team. It's a very good mindset for how to prioritize, especially, right? We've got roadmaps. We have one-pagers for those roadmaps, right? I tell my team a lot, you want to really fall in love with the problem as opposed to, speeding into a solution, which I think as, people, professionals, sometimes, even I am sort of guilty of. I see a problem and I wanna please and I wanna help, as opposed to trying to understand like what are we actually solving for here, right? Double diamonds, like product, discovery process. You can borrow whatever. So like as a mindset, I think that is absolutely and will continue to be like absolutely like I think gold standard for people teams on how to operate. But it's funny because I did call up Jesse sort of like in the lead up to this, and I kind of asked us like, Jesse, I've got this thought, but like I'm not exactly sure like if I can like verbalize it the right way. And what it really kind of evolved into quite quickly is, well, what do we think the future of people teams or like this profession is going to look like? And I think sort of what it came down to for me is there's kind of two limitations that I see today. The first one is that people teams are shapeshifters, right? They need to operate like product teams, but they're also building the things, so they're also engineers. And then they also need to be customer success managers, because they then need to make sure that the end users of a certain product, right, which is managers, for example, are able to actually use that correctly. I sometimes, say, like, I don't know if it's going to stick or not, but I sometimes say, like, we're kind of the original AI engineers, because we can't predict what a manager is going to say in a performance conversation, but we can set the prompts, right, the framework, in a way that managers will be able to have consistently, like, excellent, like, helpful conversations with their teams, right? If you also have talent under your belt, then you also need to represent salespeople. So in a way, we are basically representing the entire company on just like on a tiny footprint, right? So you need to basically like take from whatever like mindset or approach or playbook that serves you in that moment. And I'm just personally I'm a bit of a like free spirit, so I don't like to follow something to a T anyway. I like to play fast and loose a little bit with things. So I'm like all good with using a product, but I also fundamentally think that if we keep chasing somebody else's playbook, we're never gonna truly find our own step. I think I've also learned that from like living with OCD, because a lot of that is related to trying to sort of like mask or like impersonate somebody else, or inherit like some kind of version of yourself. And I feel that people functions, it's a function that is in such flux, and so is product, right? Product teams are shifting with AI. So I'm all good with adapting the playbook, but we have the freedom now to completely redraw it. We have the freedom now to say, like, look, if a performance framework is not a priority right now because it's just such a drag, like, why not do it, right? And I think that freedom we should embrace, as opposed to like trying to find another thing to stick to.
The other week, we hosted a dinner for 20 chief people officers, and surprise, surprise, the theme of the night was all about AI. How do we actually use it inside of our organization? That was the big question of the night. And it's one that we keep hearing on the show, at our events, and in all of the convos in between. It feels like for every function in HR, AI is both a friction point and a lifeline. Some orgs are just starting to experiment, while others are already redesigning how they work, with tools like Synthesia becoming part of their everyday workflows. And by the way, if you haven't heard of Synthesia, they are an AI video platform that I've been describing as Loom meets Canva. You just type your script, pick an AI presenter, and boom, you've got a training video in minutes. No cameras, no editing software, and no need to bug your creative team. And it's not just training. It's helping teams scale knowledge, localize company communications in 140 plus languages, and keeping content up to date with just a few clicks. Companies like SAP, Brinks, Five Below, Incision are already using Synthesia to scale training and improve their learning outcomes. And something we pride ourselves on at MPL is making sure that our listeners are the first to get their hands on the most cutting-edge tools out there, which is why we're hooking up all of our listeners with a 30-day free trial of Synthesia. Just head to synthesia.io/modernleader to try it out. That's synthesia.io/modernleader. I think in our prep call, you said something like, even the way that product and engineering teams are operating these days is just different. And so I was listening to a Lenny's podcast maybe last week or a few weeks ago, he had on the chief product officer of Anthropic, and he was talking about how now that 95% of the code for Claude Code is being written by Claude Code, like the biggest bottleneck that they have now is deployment, where you actually need people to go and review code and like get things out. And so I don't know what the equivalent of that is in the people space, but like, how do you think, you know, all of the advancements over the last few years with things like AI and just like, the way people are working, where do you see PeopleOps as a product needing to change the most? And I think I heard a little bit of this, like we need to be shapeshifters, we need to adapt, we can't just follow like a strict playbook, we almost need to create like our own version of that. But any other thoughts there?
Where I think it starts is actually also borrowed from product, right? Product teams have visions, right? Any company has a vision, right? But that vision is often way more easy to operationalize for, teams that, build the product or sell the product, right? At Juro, the like company mission is, to make it ridiculously easy for anybody to, agree, manage contracts online. We don't really have that for people teams. In fact, like at Juro, actually, we're kind of the org chart says customer org and company org, right? Basically reflecting the kind of two types of that we're building. So I think where it starts is having our own vision for what kind of company that we want to build that we think is going to get us to that ultimate vision like most quickly. So that I think is the thing that is going to prevent us from, yes, following a product approach, but turning into a feature factory in its own right, because it helps us set the limits, right? Our own operating strategy at Juro is we want to set the gold standard for how software companies operate in the AI era. There's a couple of pillars underneath that. One of them is like human time is going to be our most precious resource. And that has its own implications for like what we want to prioritize, right? How long should a performance review take? What stuff could AI take care of? All the way to like things that have nothing to do with AI at all, which is, how like do we want to like mandate in office time? We've always had a choice first approach that lets people like have that choice from day one, and we're not going to deviate from that. I think you've had the folks at Atlassian on that said, it's like forcing people to come in regularly doesn't make a difference, but having meaningful meetups like every couple of months, that makes a difference, right? So start by having that operating vision and working with your CEO, which we did. That's how we got to that first iteration, and cascade what you're going to build down from there. Otherwise, even with the like best product approach, you're always going to play catch up. And for us, that the best analogy that I can kind of take and draw is I think of the company have operating system, a bit like iOS or macOS or Windows Vista, whatever. Like in order to keep the right people like doing their best work and engaged, you want to really ship a new company OS every year. The reason why I mentioned like at the beginning of this call that we ship version 3 or like third iteration of our performance framework is because that's exactly how I think about it. Every year we look at the 3 core elements of our employee experience, which is pay, performance, and progression. And we look at how do we make these 3 like work perfect, like in unison with each other? What are the tweaks we can make? What does technology allow us to do like going forward? And that sort of idea helps my team and me to decide, okay, well, should we focus on this or should we focus on something else first? What is the scope that we have? So that's, I think, like really what needs to change in people teams. Have a vision of your own as opposed to just trying to follow what somebody else says, even if you do it in like a perfect, roadmap style people as a product approach way. I'd actually sort of iterate from an earlier thing. I think drink where your execs drink is a thing that I sometimes say to my team, which means that I actually think if you're just starting out in HR, don't spend that much time inside people. Get out of it. Like try to understand like what do other teams like care about? How do they operate? Like how do they work? What is important to them? Try to understand their business metrics, right? The easy way, like a very tangible way you could do this is by just kind of, if you have that connection, like just ask the exec, like, hey, what podcast do you listen to? Like what book do you find really influential? Read that, listen to that, right? Our CTO and our VP of product, they're listening to Lenny's podcast. Our CEO really likes like one specific like LinkedIn influencer. another person really likes Drive by Dan Pink. Understanding other folks, and now with ChatGPT, it's even easier, even if you don't know what LTV to CAC means. You can ask ChatGPT to sort of summarize that in simple ways. So that would be my advice. Spend your time on other islands.
So I'm gonna take out the next rapid fire question and replace it, given what you just said. Like, where are you drinking right now? Where are you getting your information?
Um, Lots of places that I said. I think Lenny's is a really interesting podcast
Shout out to
where
Lenny.
I go.
It's absolutely amazing. The newsletter is awesome. Daniel and I spent a lot of time there.
If Lenny's listening, on the off chance, have more people leaders on there. But
Peter
like,
guys.
so that's I think a great place to go. Another place I think for like people leaders is the Charter Pro newsletter. I think that one is sort of delivered like bi-weekly or so, and it's just there's a lot. It just summarizes a lot of like the news of like what's going on. It has a lot of articles, etc. That I often draw from. And I'd also say, like where I drink is places like this, right? The Modern People Leader, like every like person that you have on, they have some kind of unique perspective, and that is really like that gets my own gears turning as well, right? If you want to follow that up with MPL Build or any kind of additional resource to kind of deep dive, like great, do that. Now is the time.
What was the newsletter you said? I think I
Charter Pro is like excellent like resource of it can be a bit overwhelming because like when it's sort of like when I'm in a busy period, I get it like twice a week, and I'm like, I can't read this, it's too long, like it's just gonna get my brain going way too much. But it's it's great, it's a great resource to have.
And if you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
I actually asked my team this yesterday. I was like, I know I'm going to get this question. I'm not exactly sure how to answer. But the thing that we actually settled on was Dropbox. I think actually, Jessica Swan is a fan of this one as well. But honestly, my prediction is that we are already seeing, and definitely in 2 years, I think meetups will become much more of a perk in companies because I think AI is going to reduce the amount of interaction that people have to do with each other, even just for asking, like, how do I solve this or whatever, right? You don't have to ask a person. That can be good, it can be bad, but I definitely think it is going to put a premium on how people, interact with each other and like where they get that valuable connection. Because this is an innate human trait. We want to connect with other people. But honestly, if I never had to like organize or like help somebody organize a meetup or a summit or an offsite ever again, and just having like the playbook that people can like very easily like implement, I would do it. And I think Dropbox has a really, really good resource for getting those meetups and those valuable kind of ways of interacting with each other when you're hybrid or remote at scale. So yeah, I'd like to steal that one.
Well, we have Melanie lined up for our MPL Live New York City. That's our next MPL Live event, and so we'll have to make sure that we get your thoughts on how we can drill into some of this because this is all news to me. Last question: who should we have on the show next? Like, if there's someone who is truly pushing the boundaries like yourself, Thomas, this conversation has blown my mind. Like, thank you so much for joining us and sharing what y'all are up to. But who else is out there doing stuff like this that we should bring onto the show?
She's gonna hate me for saying this. So I think because she really doesn't like the spotlight. I think Adriana Toma, the current chief people officer at FundApps, she is like absolutely excellent. A lot of these sort of ideas that I have, I actually like run by her. We like are over at each other's offices all the time to kind of spitball things. Like she was actually very influential on that latest iteration of the performance playbook that we've got. And that's like public and out. So if you can get her on the odd, like would be excellent. She also has very specific thoughts on people as a product. So yeah, highly recommend her.
Well, we would love an intro. She sounds like the exact kind of person that we like to have onto the show. All right. So last tradition on the podcast is one word or phrase close. We all respond with a word or a few about the episode. And it could be anything.
And we prefer for our guests to go first.
Yeah, I prefer for the guests to go first. Throw me under the bus. I would say my word is flow. Because I think it's sort of come through a couple of times like over the last hour. But I do think like work, teams, ideas, like everything should just kind of flow, not clog. And this is how I often I'm a very visual thinker, and I often think of like a company kind of being a river that sort of goes downstream, right? And like you don't want to like constantly try and smash through boulders, right? You want to gently reroute the stream to make sure that it reaches its ultimate destination faster, right? And whether that is through the lens of people or technology or workflows, right? Like that is where the future, I think, of people as a profession is going. So my word is flow.
I'm going to say forking inspired.
I love it. I'm going to go with, something that was a buzzword for many, many years. And I just couldn't get behind it, but it epitomizes what I feel like we've talked about today, which is future of work. Like 2 years ago when we were all the podcasts, all the LinkedIn posts, everything, in the post-COVID era of like believing that we were, looking at the future of work, I think we now know that was a little bit of a head fake. What we are discussing now, I think it played a role in now what is being designed, which truly is the future of work. And so, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing, how you are leaving a fingerprint on the future of work and the design of that. And, it's been truly impressive to hear what you're working on. And so you're now part of our family. We oftentimes invite our guests to come back. Hopefully you'd be open to that because we would love to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All righty.
Thanks so much.
Talk to y'all later. Bye. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.